Hey y'all, it's entry number 36 of this off-season series where we discuss a different player's fantasy value each day as a group. We are another day closer to the start of the 2022 NFL season. Each day we'll drop a name, go through some positives and some concerns of their fantasy profile, and then I'll give my personal opinion at the end. Today's discussion will be on Diontae Johnson, wide receiver, Pittsburgh Steelers. We'll start with the positives with Diontae Johnson's fantasy profile. To start, we gotta talk about his volume and targets. Diontae Johnson has been one of the most utilized wide receivers in the league over the past couple of seasons. During the 2021 season, Johnson tied for being the second best wide receiver in the NFL in terms of targets with 169, only behind Cooper Kupp and tied with Davante Adams according to Pro Football Reference, and was targeted on 28.2% of his routes, the sixth best mark in the NFL according to fantasy data. He's averaged an insane 10.1 targets per game over the course of the last two seasons according to Pro Football Reference, and by seeing this kind of volume each week, it makes it easier to trust Johnson to put up numbers in your fantasy leagues, especially in PPR formats. The next positive with Diontae Johnson's fantasy profile is his 2021 red zone usage. During the 2021 NFL season, Diontae Johnson was tied for the fourth most total red zone targets in the NFL, with 27 according to NFL Savant. By being featured frequently in the red zone, it gives Diontae Johnson more opportunities to score touchdowns and fantasy points. The third major positive with Diontae Johnson's fantasy profile is his 2021 fantasy consistency. During the 2021 season, in half PPR formats, Diontae Johnson had 0 out of 16 games with 0 to 5 fantasy points, 4 out of 16 games with 5 to 10 fantasy points, 8 out of 16 games with 10 to 14.9 fantasy points, 3 out of 16 games with 15 to 20 fantasy points, and 1 out of 16 games with over 20 fantasy points according to fantasy data. He did not have any complete dud games where he scored under 5 fantasy points in 2021, in addition to scoring 10 or more fantasy points in 75% of his games. And having that kind of week-to-week consistency can be nice to have in your lineups. Moving on to some of the concerns with Diontae Johnson's fantasy profile. New quarterback. The Pittsburgh Steelers will have a new starting quarterback in 2022 after longtime franchise quarterback Ben Roethlisberger retired. In all likelihood, that starter will either be former second overall pick in the 2017 draft, Mitchell Trubisky, or the Steelers' first round pick in the 2022 NFL draft, Kenny Pickett. While Big Ben was a little washed last year, there are legit questions on whether a new quarterback will have the same chemistry and featured Diontae Johnson as much as he was in 2021, where he tied for the second most targets in the entire NFL with 169 and was targeted on 28.2% of his routes. The next concern with Diontae Johnson's fantasy profile is his past struggles with drops. During the 2020 NFL season, Diontae Johnson led the league in drop passes with 10, posted a drop rate of 10.3%, and even struggled with it to the point where he was benched for a half against the Bills in 2020. During the 2021 season, he improved, but still had 9 drops according to Player Profiler, the sixth most among wide receivers. The last major concern I have with Diontae Johnson's fantasy profile is, could the Steelers' pass attempts decline from the 2021 numbers? During the 2021 season, the Pittsburgh Steelers threw the ball 664 times, 39.06 per game, the fourth most in the NFL according to StatMuse. With Big Ben out of the picture, Matt Canada, the offensive coordinator, could shift further towards the offense we saw him run in his 175 games at the college level, which was a little more run-focused. If this happens, it would result in less volume for all the Steelers wide receivers to work from on a game-to-game basis. Some additional thoughts on Diontae Johnson. During the 2021 season, Diontae Johnson finished as the WR12 in Standard, with 167.4 total fantasy points and 10.5 fantasy points per game. The WR9 in half PPR formats with 220.9 total fantasy points and 13.8 fantasy points per game. And the WR8 in full PPR formats with 274.4 total fantasy points and 17.2 fantasy points per game, according to Fantasy Pros. While Juju Smith-Schuster is gone, the Pittsburgh Steelers still have other capable wide receivers in Chase Claypool and George Pickens, their second-round pick in the 2022 NFL Draft. Personal opinion: as of late June, Diontae Johnson is going off the board as WR17 on ESPN, about pick 47 overall, and WR15 on Yahoo, about pick 43 overall. I get the concerns with the new quarterback and the team potentially moving away from being one of the more pass-heavy teams in the league, but this still feels a couple of spots too low for a player that gets open as frequently as Diontae. He was a top 12 fantasy wide receiver in all formats, with a QB that played at a below-average level, only averaging 233.8 passing yards and 1.38 passing touchdowns per game during the 2021 season. Mitch Trubisky and Kenny Pickett will probably not light the world on fire themselves, but putting up per-game numbers around this level seems very doable for them in 2022. I would rank Johnson in the WR12 to WR14 range going into the 2022 season. For each of these entries, we will highlight a charitable cause or organization. I couldn't find a charity that Diontae Johnson officially supports, so here's a link to his teammate Cameron Hayward's foundation, the Hayward House, which helps Pittsburgh's youth in a variety of different ways, from visiting children who have serious medical conditions, taking kids shopping for winter clothes, or sending birthday presents and cards to kids who rarely get celebrated. Here's a link to that organization below. And that's it for today's entry. If you enjoyed this entry, be sure to like and subscribe.